Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Solari Report. We have a very special treat today. From reading the book review at Solari, you know how enthusiastic I am about a new book, Hijacking Bitcoin, The Hidden History of Bitcoin, written by Roger Ver and Steve Patterson. And we are delighted that Steve could join us today to discuss the book, to discuss what they described about the hidden history of Bitcoin, what it means to you and me. And Steve, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your taking the time to join us today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Well, thank you. I'm looking forward to it as well, and it's really my pleasure.
So I just have to say before we start, I think this is in the economics and finance area, this is the book of the year. This is head and shoulders. I don't know if Financial Times has anointed you book of the year in that
Not yet.
space, but they should. And one of the reasons is this is a remarkably well-written book. This is a book that, I've tried to get a lot of financial professionals to read this book, but I assure them beforehand that they can absolutely understand it. Their first response is, oh, if it's a book on Bitcoin, it's going to be impossible to understand. It won't make any sense. And I say, no. This one, it's totally clear, it's totally coherent. You're going to understand everything, even the technology, the technological issues. And so before we start, I have to tell you how grateful I am, because I've tried to read many books on Bitcoin, and I've tried very hard to do a proper due diligence, especially when I was an investment advisor. And this is head and shoulders above any book about Bitcoin. It's so clear, and it's so helpful to a non-technologist to help understand Bitcoin. So,
well, thank you.
I'm very grateful.
That is extremely a high praise, and I really appreciate that. That was the goal. The goal was maximum clarity for people who aren't techies and they aren't knee deep in Bitcoin or its history or the dramas involved. Not only do we discuss very critically important history, but also the first part of the book is really laying out the concepts for everybody at the most basic level. What is Bitcoin? How does it work? How is it supposed to work? And to hear that was mission accomplished, that we did a good job is great. So thank you.
And it's I mean, it's very entertaining. The one thing I will stress, and this is one of the reasons I was so glad you could join us, I know how hard it is to write a book involving situations that involve tremendous drama and passion, and do it in a way that is completely clear and calm. And so my theory, when I saw that there were two co-authors, I said, because Roger was right in the middle of the drama. I don't know how close you were to the drama, but I said, okay, it must have been Patterson who was able to get this way calmed down. And that is an enormous challenge. And I just have to ask you how you did it.
Yeah, well, it wasn't easy, to be honest. So it wasn't even me. You should have seen the earlier drafts. I couldn't help. I did a lot of the writing because Roger's a very busy guy, so I did a lot of the writing for the book. And the earlier drafts were more pointed and more personal. And not only was there a lot of personal drama involved, but Bitcoin is a very important project still. It's one of the most important technologies out there still. And so what happened to Bitcoin, in Roger and my view, is very upsetting. And there were a lot of dirty tricks and dirty tactics and smear campaigns and censorship and propaganda, some of which is still ongoing today. And so, yes, it really was a challenge to try to tone it down. But what we tried to do with the book is make it as not just as clear as possible, but also as factual and calm and carefully referenced and sourced as possible. So there's like 287 citations in the book, which is more pages, more citations than there are pages in the book.
Right.
And we left out, a huge amount of speculation, of personal stories that can't be, backed up with actual citations. It's just personal history. We tried to make it as absolutely rigorous as possible so that we could avoid the criticism that we played fast and loose.
Right.
And I can say, even from the people that really don't like what we have to say, they don't like Roger, or they don't like myself, there has been virtually zero factual criticism of the book. I have seen
Right.
Almost nobody is even trying to lie about it, which is actually surprising. Like part of the history of Bitcoin is there are these legions of unknown, anonymous Twitter trolls that will go, misrepresenting and smearing. And we haven't even gotten that almost at all, which tells me that, we threaded the needle here in terms of trying to get enough. There's a lot of salacious content that there are, maybe not salacious, exciting, shocking quotes in the book. And hopefully
Right.
we can talk about that later. Some of the important people involved are saying things that are, stunning, like about how they're just going to start censoring people. And they say openly, we're just going to start censoring the people and it will be for the good of Bitcoin.
Right.
It's their words, not ours. But anyway, we have I think we also found a way to make it shocking. If you are not familiar with the history of Bitcoin, you're going to walk away thinking you are now aware of a scandal in Bitcoin that most people don't know of. And yet it's all extremely carefully sourced. And if you want to go through and like check all the links, I think you'll find this was very carefully written, intentionally so.
Well, good job. So I want to get into some speculation, but I want to wait until we go after the book because I think you've accomplished something even more extraordinary than you may know, and we'll talk about why.
Okay.
But I will say this: it's been very interesting for me as a financial professional who has a real expertise in financial fraud, several times to come and do serious due diligence of Bitcoin and blockchain and crypto. And it's a very different world. And so what's hard is to find information on Bitcoin that I can give to a financial professional and it will be immediately accessible and useful for them and they'll be able to integrate it with the markets they know.
Mm.
And that's why this book is working for me because I'm able to send it around to many people and suddenly bam, they start to integrate. And to me, integration between different areas is critical to understand our world. So
well, let me ask you a question on this. So I've done just a couple of interviews since the book has been released, and I'm making a bold claim that I'll stand by, and I would love to know your thoughts on it. So my claim is that if you are not aware of the information in this book, it's not that you have to buy the book, it's that there's a lot of important information in here. If you are not aware of the key facts, frankly, in this book, you can't understand what Bitcoin is.
correct. Absolutely.
I think that's important. I'm not just trying to sell copies of the book here. There's
Right.
find a free copy online. They already exist. Like you were saying, try to do your due diligence. But if you don't know about the fact that the main discussion platforms online for years, there were two, and they were owned by the same one pseudonymous person who decided himself to censor the major discussion platforms to get rid of dissent for years. If you started criticizing some of the power players involved in Bitcoin, you were banned. If you don't know that fact, you can't understand
Right.
what Bitcoin is and why there seems to be this narrative that hasn't really been challenged. If you don't know, for example, that there are, core software developers that formed their own company that got hundreds of millions of dollars from the financial industry in venture capital investment and otherwise. They formed their company and are providing people with an alternative blockchain called the Liquid Network on which they get all the transaction fees. You really can't understand what's going on in Bitcoin. If you don't
Right.
understand the history, for example, of the block size war and the details arguments that we give in the book, if you don't understand Satoshi's perspective, which we quote in the book, you literally can't understand Bitcoin. So I don't think that's an exaggeration to say if you don't read this book, or that's fine. But if you don't know the information in the book, you really can't know what you're talking about. And I don't say that to insult anybody. It's just that's the level of importance I think.
I completely agree. If you haven't read this book, you are operating with significant what we call material emissions. So that's number one. But number two, one, I don't think you understand what Bitcoin is. But two, I also don't think you understand what the pricing mechanism is and
Yes.
why the pricing mechanism is the way it is.
Yes.
And then I don't think you understand the public policy debate that's going on around
Right.
it. So, I agree with you completely. You're dead on right. Okay, so let's dive in and go back, because one of the things we open up with an introduction and forward, an introduction from Jeffrey Tucker, or I forget. Yeah, I think it's one of them's from Jeffrey Tucker.
Yeah.
It's a forward from Jeffrey Tucker at Brownstone, and then an introduction from Roger. And one of the things that they both stress is the importance of free markets and real price discovery. And I'm going to keep coming back to real price discovery, because I think one of the things that's happened in the hijacking of Bitcoin is something that dramatically changes the nature of the pricing, the pricing mechanism, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So one of our subscribers said it went from being a pilot program on a global payment system to a Ponzi scheme. Now, that's gross oversimplification, but for those of us who are coming at this new, it's a way of looking at something that went from a prototype that I think had potential, enormous power.
Yeah.
And I remember back when all this began, how exciting it was to contemplate that power. And so there's something wonderful here. And so let's start with part one, the ingenious design. Talk about why Bitcoin had the potential to be something. I always get criticized for saying this, because somebody said, well, it was created from the beginning to be a scam. Well, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. That's a debate for another day. But there is no doubt the design has incredibly wonderful potential.
Satoshi Nakamoto, the inventor of Bitcoin, could be one of the richest people on Earth. But many years ago, Satoshi had disappeared, and with Bitcoin being woven into the fabric of the financial system, solidifying its role as digital gold, perhaps the question of Satoshi's identity was more pressing than ever.
We should start with just an interview with you in Malta, if that sounds good to you.
Okay.
Who would have been working around the clock to introduce something like Bitcoin?
A lot of technical people will say, I could have done that. It's actually much harder than it looks.
Anyone competent enough to go do Bitcoin probably would be competent enough to not leave any traces.
Satoshi's got nothing to pick up by his stash.
Yeah, just 1 million Bitcoin.
The currency derived from electricity might pose a real threat to the dollar.
3, 2, 1.
If it gained in popularity.
And the crazy prince starts talking about Bitcoin.
What we're trying to do is get parallel systems in place. Dollars, Bitcoin, pesos, Bitcoin, yen, Bitcoin.
If it looks like something could replace the US dollar as the world's reserve currency, three-letter agencies will do whatever they can to disrupt projects like Bitcoin.
I would rather buy shit that's worth something than buying crypto.
Bitcoin is about undermining the Federal Reserve, disintermediating the nation state.
It's not like Satoshi had some master plan.
Yeah, it's like you're in some sort of cult. You guys are having fun now.
Right?
Satoshi left a lot of digital history.
When he left, he distributed control amongst different people in the community.
Were you the first person that Satoshi reached out to?
I believe so, yeah.
Best evidence of him being Satoshi.
Of not being Satoshi.
Being Satoshi.
What indication did you have that he was collaborating with the government?
If you dig deep enough, the inconsistencies will emerge.
Seems like he's responding.
I've been told Satoshi was a group of people.
I have to be careful at talking about that topic.
He checks a lot of boxes.
I will admit, you're pretty creative. You come with some crazy theories.
Here's what I think happened.
It's Bitcoin. Don't trust, verify.
Yes. So the original design, for people who don't know, because even the original purpose of Bitcoin has been largely lost to history and isn't really spoken about in the narrative surrounding Bitcoin today. The purpose of Bitcoin was to be an alternative currency for the internet that you use as a medium of exchange for payment. It was going to be digital cash for the internet. This, of course, has almost nobody's talking about Bitcoin like this anymore. They talk about it as a store of value. It's digital gold. It's an asset you're supposed to buy and hold and hope the price goes up. And the price goes up because you think other people are going to buy it and hold it and also hope the price goes up. So it definitely has the spirit of maybe a pyramid scheme. Especially if you listen to, how people are discussing Bitcoin, there's generally some sort of pitch in there that's like, oh, you really should buy this asset, which I happen to hold, and then you'll make money and I'll make money too. This was not the original spirit of Bitcoin. The original spirit was noticing that we don't have great payment systems for the internet. The white paper that Satoshi Nakamoto put out to the world was at the end of 2008. And if you put yourself back in that time in 2008, you had credit cards that you could use online for payments. I don't know when PayPal, you might have had a version of PayPal or early version of PayPal by then. But with these systems for payment, they could be slow, expensive, and cumbersome. But most importantly, they're permissioned. So if you the term today is debanked. We didn't have this term back in the day. But if PayPal doesn't like what you're doing, or PayPal doesn't want to give you an account, you can just say they'll just kick you off the platform.
Right.
You can't use PayPal. Or if you're not in good graces with the credit card companies, they'll just cancel your credit card and cancel your accounts. If you want to send a bank wire, then you have to be in good standing with the bank. Otherwise, you can't send bank wire. The idea with Bitcoin was, hey, here is an alternative currency that you can send peer-to-peer from me to you directly without having to have trust in a centralized institution. You don't have to have trust in a third party, in a specific bank or in a specific company in order to make the exchange.
Right, and especially for international.
Right.
So international was going to make it much easier to make international payments and to do it at very low cost.
Yes, and the average transaction fee, there's no reason for Bitcoin to have a transaction fee of more than a penny for regular cash transactions. There will be more complex transactions, people that are, if you're receiving 1,000, if you're an online company receiving 1,000 payments, maybe you're going to have a little bit larger transaction, so you pay a little bit more. But for regular usage in commerce, there's no reason that you would need more than a penny for a transaction fee. Now, today, the fees range wildly depending on how much the network is used, but it could be a couple of dollars to send a transaction, to $10 to $50 to, if you're one of these businesses that has larger transactions, you can literally be paying thousands of dollars to transact on Bitcoin. It can be very slow. Yes, and there's a reason for that. And the reason is that there is a effectively artificial technical limit in Bitcoin called the block size limit, which is like a throughput limit, which right now caps it on BTC at 7 transactions per second. And there really isn't a widespread way of making that number increase. So if more than 7 people per second want to use it, then you have to wait in line. You have to wait until the other transactions clear out. Now, this was not the intended long-term design. Nowadays, people think that this type of scaling limitation, this type of inefficient confirmation time fact of Bitcoin, they think this is inherent to Bitcoin's design. In fact, for years, it used to be fashionable to say that blockchains themselves can't scale. You'd say, we learned empirically that the blockchain technology can't scale, and now we have to try something else. This is simply not true at all. Right. Blockchains can scale. They were designed to scale, and the original version of Bitcoin, the original vision of Bitcoin, was scaling to reach, hundreds of millions of people. Satoshi Nakamoto himself wrote many things in emails and forum posts where he was comparing Bitcoin's scaling capacity to Visa back in 2009. And we're talking, he was going through the calculations, and we're talking, maybe you have 100 million transactions. You could do it this way. It actually scales efficiently. So the vision was always massive global scale to have a alternative currency that was peer-to-peer cash essentially for the world. And there's no technical reason why that isn't achievable. It's an amazing vision. Yeah, go ahead.
So let me step back. If you could get enough people to adapt a system like this, then you have a global payment system, which solves a problem. Now, while it was solving this problem, we should note that a lot of the other financial service providers, they're processing costs are coming down and their speed is improving. So
Yes.
we have Venmo, we have others.
Yes.
You know, there's room for the competitor, but we would end up with a global payment system that is decentralized, is low cost, and has utility.
Yes.
I mean, one of the things you point out is that for something to have value, it has to have utility. And if the original vision had been able to be implemented, you're talking about something that would have extraordinary utility, but, you know, from the point of view of the people running the planet, it would be out of control.
Yes. So let me say one thing on that. Imagine that we had a technology that was like Bitcoin in terms of being a store of value. That is to say, let's go with the idea that Bitcoin is a hard money. It's something we should probably discuss. We can poke holes in that narrative a little bit further. But the way that people are imagining Bitcoin right now, imagine we could couple that Bitcoin, the $100,000 a Bitcoin version of Bitcoin, with global payment system that you can actually use in commerce for peer-to-peer transactions for everybody everywhere where transactions are a penny or less. Imagine merging those two things together where you have, you know, if you're thinking about it in terms of markets, well, gold is one market that has gold and silver and precious metals. That is a market with a particular size. But what's the currency markets, right? There's a much bigger world out there in terms of currency and payments and transactions and money than there is just gold and precious metals and stores of value. So, wow, wouldn't that be a best case situation? You merge these two concepts together. Well, that was what Bitcoin was supposed to be. That's what Bitcoin can do. So the possibility for this to be, you know, a world-changing invention, it's very apparent when you see it as having all those wonderful store of value properties with those incredible monetary properties that the original Bitcoin had, or the original vision was supposed to have.
But you're discussing something that has a fundamental utility to it.
Yes.
And what has happened, the hijacking of Bitcoin was to convert it in something that I would describe has no fundamental utility other than a pump and dump tool.
Yes. So there's a lot that can be said on this. I mean,
right.
If a BTC supporter, a Bitcoin supporter is trying to be intellectually honest with you, almost without fail, they'll either say that essentially we're doing this because we can all make money, or they will say, well, the idea is in the future, we're going to get Bitcoin to turn into cash. Eventually, someday, it'll be this peer-to-peer cash thing that you can use in commerce. And they'll say, well, there's going to be second layers like the Lightning Network that you can use. You can actually will be able to use your Bitcoins in commerce. There's just a little problem with that is none of the second layers actually deliver on their promises.
Well, but there's something else. If you guys did a fabulous job of describing the governance issues that converted this into, you know, from a potential payment system that had utility into, you know, something which makes money for the early investors.
Yeah.
I'll describe it that way. Or is a pump and dump tool. So you do a good job describing that. But what you're describing is a governance system that no serious financial professional would ever trust.
Oh, yeah, yes, that's its own. That's definitely its own thing we should talk about. Let me just close that one thread. That if somebody is trying to be honest about the value of Bitcoin, then what they can say is that in the future it will have real utility. It might not have real utility now, but maybe there will be a future technology that doesn't exist yet that will give it utility. That's at least possible. That's at least something. It should be noted that Bitcoin was effectively hijacked in pursuit of these promises. The narrative was, oh, you don't have to worry about scaling Bitcoin correctly because we're going to get these second layer solutions. And anyway, now we're here in 2024, and those second layer solutions do not work as advertised at all. That would be a gross understatement. But yes, with regards to the governance, this is one of the things I'm probably angered most by when having discussions about Bitcoin, is that there is part of the narrative, part of this very strong Bitcoin narrative that's out there, is that Bitcoin is somehow separate from humans, that Bitcoin is a feature of nature. You have Mount St. Helens over here, you have the Pacific Ocean over there, you have Bitcoin over there off in the distance, and you can't touch it, you can't access it. It's just some immutable law of nature.
Right.
That could not be farther from the truth. And I will guarantee anybody who reads Hijacking Bitcoin will soon be dissuaded of this idea, because it's factually and theoretically not true.
Right.
Bitcoin is very much a human project that has a hierarchy that is determining what effectively gets put into Bitcoin's software code and what doesn't. So,
and how it fundamentally works.
Yes.
Is it a payment system or is it a pump and dump tool?
Absolutely. So how did we go from the original vision of Bitcoin was going to be this payment system, this decentralized digital cash thing, into what it currently is, where you're supposed to buy it and hold it and not use it in commerce? The mechanism that got us from here to there, or from there to here, is by control over the software of Bitcoin. And specifically, they did this little trick, because what they'll say is, oh, look, the software didn't change. So therefore, how can you say Bitcoin was hijacked? Because look, the software has remained the same. The reason this is a trick is because the software developers gave themselves veto power over the software that goes into Bitcoin. And by giving themselves veto power, they prevented it from scaling. The original vision was, we're going to scale this way. It's going to be, layer one scaling. We're going to have everybody is going to be able to access the blockchain themselves. They're not going to have to go through companies. And this small group of software developers said, no. We're the experts. We're the technical experts here. And we decided that those changes are not going to go into the code. And we're going to keep Bitcoin capped at 7 transactions per second indefinitely. So by doing so, by not changing the code, they completely changed Bitcoin. What Bitcoin was supposed to be, how it was supposed to grow, they did it by putting their foot down and saying, oh, actually, how Satoshi designed Bitcoin, we're not going to go that route. We're going to go through we're going to implement our own new vision here.
So this is what I would say. What this does is it creates a vehicle which it's much easier with less money to run up the price fast and run the price down fast.
Yes.
So if you want to create financial volatility and price volatility, it's perfect.
Yes, there's a lot of ways you can do that. One of them, one of the smoking guns, or it's not a smoking gun, it's a lot of smoke that I wish people would look into a little bit more, is Tether. So we don't talk about Tether at all in the book. It's not mentioned once, but Tether is a stablecoin that is sort of some of the financial plumbing and how money in crypto moves around.
Right.
There is an enormous amount of smoke around Tether. They have admitted, at least on one occasion, that the money that they claim to be sitting in cash is not actually there, and they're making a bunch of promises. Oh, we'll make good on the money, the coins that are supposed to be backed by US dollars. Tether is another one of these tools where if you wanted to run the price up, all you have to do is print up a bunch of tethers. It's a small group of people that have the power to do this. You print up a bunch of tethers, and then you go to the exchanges to buy up the Bitcoin, and the price would go through the roof, especially if you have like an unlimited amount of tethers that you could buy. Now, this is speculation. I don't have hard evidence that this is the case. And like I said, we didn't even talk about this in the book at all. And yet, if I had to bet on it, I would say that is definitely happening in Bitcoin for the purpose of turning it into a pump and up system. Because you can make an unbelievable amount of money by playing those types of games.
Well, Tether is, for example, in the case of Tether, they're framed as like a private issuer of dollars. It's really a public-private partnership at this point. They've onboarded the FBI and Secret Service to their platform, both of which are technically intelligence agencies.
And they're facilitating a lot of seizures and access to information.
Yes.
Right.
Yep. On behalf of the Treasury and being basically a tool of, American government sanctions, and by extension, American foreign policy. And so obviously the dollar stable coins that Tether issues come with a catch, right? And I mean, they've been very explicit that their goal is to be a great partner for the US government to expand dollar hegemony globally. And there's a lot of efforts from this broader PayPal group and also from Tether, which have, a significant amount of overlap, I'd say, to basically onboard hyperinflating economies in Latin America, some of which are a direct consequence of American government sanctions. You could link a lot of what's gone on in Venezuela, in Argentina, to policies either of the US government in terms of sanctions or to entities like the IMF, which are US dominated. And so, this economic warfare against these economies for now decades is now being used to onboard a lot of the people there to a stable currency. And it is essentially, it's by and large been these dollar stable coins.
Well, don't you think stable coins gives them the power to do much more in the way of sanctions?
Yeah, well, because it's programmable, surveillable, seizable currency, just like, what the concerns around CBDCs are.
Right.
But those same things exist with Tether and are being utilized that way by Tether. And there's plenty of people, particularly in the Bitcoin media space, who criticize, debt-based monetary system and fiat in general, but are very keen to promote Tether.
Right.
But it's important to keep in mind too that Tether specifically is morphing to something much more than just a stablecoin issuer. They are now investing in brain machine interfaces in this company that we mentioned earlier, Satellogic, which is part of this Endeavor network. Howard Lutnick of Cantor Fitzgerald is on the board. The chair of the board is Steve Mnuchin. And then also on the board is the Joint Chiefs of Staff under Trump. So one of the top military officials under Trump is on the board of this Satellogic company that, as we previously reported, is involved in this broader effort to impose a carbon market on Latin America and build out a shared smart power grid between North, South, and Central America. And it really seems like a lot of the overlap between those networks and what's going on in El Salvador. El Salvador has sort of been a beta test for this. It's a dollarized economy that's been cooed by the CIA numerous times, and it sort of seems like it's been a beta test for a lot of this stuff where it's framed publicly as being like, Bitcoin only or Bitcoin adoption, but it has all these ties to other entities like Tether and also to something like Algorand, which is run by this woman, Stacey Warden, who used to work for Michael Milken at the Milken Institute, and I believe was a big JP Morgan, debt baroness in Latin America.
One of the things I did, so I've lived through before Bitcoin and crypto, I lived through many pump and dumps, but with other markets. And so, but I also lived through a lot of research into serious collateral fraud. So at one point, I knew more about collateral fraud in the mortgage markets than anybody outside of the intelligence agencies. And so I've seen a lot of collateral fraud and a lot of pumping and dumping. And, there's definitely a relationship. But one of the things I started to see it was 2017 on, which is a very interesting year if you look at hijacking Bitcoin. There was an enormous effort made to talk. The central bankers were buying gold. They had big long-term buying programs in gold. And one of their challenges is how do you keep people how do you keep retail away from gold if the central bankers are all buying? Well, the marketing towards precious metals buyers and retail of Bitcoin and crypto was extraordinary. And the effort to win them away by convincing them that this was, like it was a store of value like gold or like oil, and they could make more than they could in gold. And it was very successful in keeping wave after wave of people who'd formerly been precious metals buyers or could have become precious metals buyers away from gold and silver. It was very successful.
Yes, I'm not surprised about the time involved. So 2017, as we say in the book, was the craziest year in Bitcoin's history. I think that still stands. There was a lot happening at that time. And I agree that was, I would say in 2017, we saw the current narrative congeal. It was like the transition from digital cash, that you were going to have an alternative payment system, use this cool new technology in commerce and everyday commerce, to this is now a different financial thing. It's solidified and became complete in 2017. And it was funny. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and they were saying they were talking with a Bitcoiner who was trying to really pitch them on this idea of Bitcoin's a store of value and it's supposed to be digital gold. And person was saying, well, if you look at what Bitcoin was supposed to be, there's a lot of evidence that like it's actually supposed to be this a different system. It's supposed to be peer-to-peer cash. And the lady in question said, hey, listen, I've been following Bitcoin since 2017. Okay, I know what I'm talking about. And we both laughed, like, of all the years to start following it, yeah, that's not a mark of pride.
Right.
I should also say one more thing I should mention is if people have got in even as early as 2017, you have to realize the information that you're going to be consuming online has already been very carefully managed for you. So there were mass censorship wars that were taking place the years prior to 2017. And essentially the dissidents and the critics lost the narrative battle.
Right.
If you can think about COVID. So imagine it's 2014 now, or 2024, and we're looking back on COVID, and imagine we didn't have Twitter, a free platform like Twitter and Substack. And somebody is coming in 2024 or 2025, and they're thinking, oh, what happened during this COVID situation? And they're trying to read all the information that's out there from the CDC and all the expert authorities. And whatever idea they're going to have in their head of what COVID was and what we went through is going to be completely crafted by information controllers.
Right.
If we didn't have the free speech alternatives, people would have very little chance of figuring out what happened during COVID. And it's the exact same situation with Bitcoin, that the narrative was heavily, heavily censored, stretching back to really 2014.
Right. That was one of the things I learned from reading Hijacking Bitcoin was how extraordinary the censorship was. And I've dealt with extraordinary censorship before, but there was something about, and I've seen this before, but this matched the worst I've ever seen.
Yes.
There was something about how extraordinarily aggressive and mean the effort was to censorship.
Remember what happened with COVID? Just recently, they were vicious in trying to get, professional researchers and biologists and doctors. They were trying to get them fired from their positions for being COVID dissidents. I mean, we just lived through that.
But here's what you didn't have in Bitcoin that you did have in medicine and health. You had a small group of people who had been fighting many of those issues for more than a decade. So let me give you an example. When I became an investment advisor, because I had so many requests from people who were listening to me talk about financial fraud. And I ended up with a whole bunch of clients who were struggling not with financial fraud, but with healthcare fraud, and particularly vaccine injury. And this was something I had no understanding of. I knew nothing about. But after 10 years of working with all these clients who were dealing with vaccine injury, I ended up, reading all the books and trying to figure out what was going on. And it was a small group, but they were very, very intelligent, very well-funded, and very committed to helping other people be healthy. They really, their feeling was, my child was killed and I'm going to do everything to make sure that never happens to another mother again. These are warrior moms. They're outrageous.
Yeah.
Anyway, but they were able in COVID to insert themselves, and they had dealt with the kind of mean censorship that had been going on in that area. It was equally mean, but they had dealt with it and they'd sort of broken through the trance. And they were there like a tip of the spear. And you didn't have that in Bitcoin. I didn't see any, I've never seen in sort of my experience of reading Hijacking Bitcoin where you had that troop of, 1,000 warrior moms coming in to protect you against the bad guys.
Well, this is why it's such an interesting time period, because in probably really up until 2017, and it's a little bit murkier before that, But the position we articulate in the beginning of the book, that Bitcoin is supposed to be digital cash for the world and it can scale just fine, this was actually the norm position. It's hard to recreate going back because it's so not the norm. It's the extreme 1% minority now. But this used to be the norm. But the people, you know, your average Bitcoiner, if you were to go to a Bitcoin meetup conference, this was the belief of the average Bitcoiner at that time.
Oh yeah.
Yes. So
and it was grounded in the truth. It could have been that. Yes,
I think I'm going to make a prediction here. This might be wildly naive, but I think it's plausible that if hijacking Bitcoin and the ideas in hijacking Bitcoin get out into the mainstream, I would not be surprised if we saw something like we saw with the COVID dissidents suddenly start getting the upper hand, because the COVID dissidents on net had the truth on their side. Not every single claim from every single dissident was accurate, but in fact, there is mass corruption in the domain of scientific research, but also scientific practice, government regulation, the media. They were spot on all of that. And that narrative, I think, is winning the day. You know, people their eyes are being opened all the time. They didn't realize how big the problem was, and now they do. I think we very plausibly could see something like that happen in Bitcoin.
I agree.
Hopefully this book might be the catalyst, but I know for a lot of people, like with COVID, they were like, I didn't know that things were so corrupt and so bad. And the narrative that you're being told about Bitcoin, the average person, is so disconnected from the truth. It's so manufactured and fake and so different than it used to be. I think the book is strong enough to kind of wake people up, and maybe we can start getting these conversations going again.
So I want to talk about before we can achieve that, we have to go through, it's like a surfer. There's a big wave coming, and we're going to have to surf this big wave. I want to talk about that big wave. But before I do, I want to go to something that came up in the part 2 of the book, which is the hijacking part. And that is, as I said, I've looked at a lot of collateral fraud issues. And as globally we've built the debt growth model, the debt growth model has exploded with tremendous amounts of collateral fraud. The collateral fraud in the U.S. mortgage markets is, beyond huge. What has come up, because I've been waiting to see in Bitcoin how they achieve the collateral fraud. Not because anything's happening in Bitcoin to make me think it, but since they've done it every time before, it's bound to happen. And of course, here's the thing. If you read the history of currency, 50 centuries, counterfeiting is always the big problem. How do you deal with counterfeiting? And it always comes up because it's so profitable. Okay, so you go into what's called the inflation bug.
Yeah.
In the second part, tell us about the inflation bug, because when I read the inflation bug, I was like, I knew it.
So yes, this is another interesting little piece of Bitcoin's history that has been lost, but we talk about it in the book. In 2016, there was a addition to Bitcoin software that was put forward by a guy, I believe it was Matt Corallo, who was one of the Bitcoin Core developers. This core group of software developers are called the Bitcoin Core developers. And I forget what the intended purpose of this little software update was, but it turned out to have a unfortunate side effect that wasn't discovered until 2 years later. In 2018, there was a Bitcoin Cash developer, a different cryptocurrency developer, who found a bug in the Bitcoin software that would have allowed for arbitrary inflation. That is to say, new coins being created out of thin air, which if you were to rank the severity of bugs in Bitcoin software, that would essentially be the top. The top of the list would be, oh, oopsie, arbitrary inflation. Now you can create a bunch of coins that weren't supposed to exist.
Well, and I want to remind everybody listening, sort of one of the core attractions of Bitcoin was you can only create 21 million. It's limited. You can't create Bitcoin out of thin air, supposedly.
Right. And there are a couple of asterisks by this claim, because apparently you can, at least in a bug. Now, this bug was not exploited. And the developer, his name was, his handle at least was Awmany, I think was his name. And he privately disclosed this bug to the BTC developers who patched it before anybody exploited it, which is also an interesting piece of history here, because this Awmany character could have, what he could have done is take a massive short position on BTC, paid somebody to exploit this bug and destroy people's confidence in Bitcoin, and then made a boatload of money. But he didn't do that. He had some ethics and said, okay, I don't want this. I don't want to do that. And so he disclosed it in the correct way, and then they patched the bug and disaster averted. But yes, this is part of Bitcoin's history, is there was an inflation bug. In fact, there was in the earliest days, I want to say it was 2010, and I don't think this is mentioned in the book, there was an actually exploited inflation bug. Somebody created like 3 billion Bitcoin or something, and they had to fork the network to avoid that history of the transactions. They patched the bug, and then they fixed it. But that is in Bitcoin's history. So the original software, if you were to download the original software from 2009, it wouldn't actually sync up to the present blockchain because they already had an inflation bug. I should also mention, just to highlight the point that Bitcoin is not separate from humans, another one of the Bitcoin Core developers' name is Peter Todd. Very interesting character. Much could be said about this individual, but he has already floated now on at least two different occasions, that maybe the Bitcoin Core developers should, he's making a recommendation that maybe they should increase the coin limit to make it unlimited into the future. And let me tell you why. So there is a looming problem in Bitcoin. And that looming problem is, how do you pay the miners of Bitcoin for the security of putting all this computer power and electricity into securing the Bitcoin network? Well, the way that the miners get compensated is through transaction fees. The miners make the transaction fees. And they also get what's called the block reward. And the block reward is new Bitcoins that have been minted up until that 21 million limit. The miners get the block reward. And so that's how they can justify financially putting all of this investment into securing the Bitcoin network. Okay, but there's a problem. If there's a hard limit to the amount of coins that are going to come into existence, there will be never more than 21 million, supposedly. And we have 7 transactions per block limit on the Bitcoin network. How are the miners supposed to pay for the security of the Bitcoin network? There's really only one way, and that's with sky-high transaction fees. If you're only allowing 7 transactions per second, maybe you can get away with paying for Bitcoin security by having $1,000 transaction fees, $10,000 transaction fees. Perhaps that could work. But if that doesn't work, if people aren't willing to spend thousands of dollars per transaction, you now have a critical security problem in Bitcoin. And so this Bitcoin Core developer has suggested on multiple occasions, maybe what we could do is uncap that 21 million limit to make it so you get a fixed block reward ad infinitum. So it's 0.0005 or whatever. BTC will be minted every block forever. Now, that is perfectly technically possible. It's not written in the stars that Bitcoin has to be capped. If enough people decide the future is going to look like Bitcoin without that 21 million limit, that absolutely could be in the future.
Okay, so let me make this worse.
Okay.
So now we see the SEC has approved exchange-traded funds. Now, once upon a time, I and my general counsel did a very deep dive on the precious metals exchange-traded funds and was able to demonstrate why any investment advisor who wanted to advise his client to buy gold in a security form wouldn't touch them with a 10-foot pole. The chances of the gold or silver being there was highly questionable.
Right.
So now, if you think that I believe that the ETFs, which are growing quickly, whether there is you can be confident that they really hold the Bitcoin that they're selling. There is potential for enormous collateral shortages. And so So with the ETFs, you can sell many millions more Bitcoin than Bitcoin exists.
Yeah.
Right.
So effectively just recreating the system that Bitcoin was supposed to get us out of.
Right.
Where now what matters is that there are trustworthy companies making promises that they have the tokens that they claim to have.
Right. So you're buying a bank IOU priced in
Yes.
Bitcoin. That's
Right.
what you're buying.
Right.
But here's the thing. If I'm a busy person, so I'm a mother with 2 kids and I'm busy and I'm not good with technology, pointing and clicking at Fidelity or Schwab is much easier than grappling with a wallet or
Yes.
getting an account on at an exchange.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
So, and this always makes me nervous because the custodian for the BlackRock ETF is the same custodian as the Department of Justice's asset forfeiture fund managed by the U.S. Marshals. They can share and lease.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, that is absolutely the world that we're going into is custodial Bitcoin. It didn't have to be that way, but that is definitely, I mean, that is already the majority of your average consumer's usage in Bitcoin is you're going through a company, and it's not that you personally own the Bitcoin. It's that a company is promising you, because you're storing the Bitcoin with them, that it's still in the vaults, so to speak. And that's just that's a trust-based decision.
Okay, so hold that thought, and now I'm going to take you into the world of financial fraud and then come back.
Okay.
So in 2017, and it was interesting, it was at the same conference, apparently Roger was there, but I don't remember meeting him at the Nexus at Aspen Institute in 2017. And but it was a conference on cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, and I saw the first trial balloon of something I'm going to describe. And then the second trial balloon that I ever saw was at Bitcoin 2024 when RFK spoke.
I intend, as President of the United States, to sign an executive order on day one, directing the Department of Justice and the U.S. Marshals to transfer the approximately 200,000 Bitcoin held by the U.S. government to the United States Treasury, where it will be held as a strategic asset. On day one as president, I will sign another executive order directing the U.S. Treasury to purchase 550 Bitcoin daily until the U.S. has built a reserve of at least 4 million Bitcoins and a position of dominance that no other country will be able to usurp. Our nation holds approximately 19% of global gold reserves. This policy will give us about the same proportion of total Bitcoin. The cascading impact from these actions will eventually move Bitcoin to a valuation of hundreds of trillions of dollars. On day one as president, I will sign also an executive order directing the IRS to issue public guidelines that all transactions between Bitcoin and the US dollar are unreportable transactions. And by extension, non-taxable. On day one as president, I will also sign an executive order directing the IRS to treat Bitcoin as an eligible asset for 1031 exchange into real property.
And this is the idea of the Bitcoin strategic reserve. And but what was interesting, so I saw another trial balloon, but then magically the day after the election, I've been working with state legislators around the country who are focused on financial freedom. So they've been working to protect financial freedom at the state level in many different ways. We have a major paper up at Solari, What States Can Do, about how states can protect our financial future. suddenly they are inundated with an AstroTurf campaign for a Bitcoin strategic reserve, not just at the federal level, but at the states. Okay. So if you're a pharmaceutical company, how do you get people to buy your vaccine? You have the government mandate it. If you're the early investors and you want to pump Bitcoin through the roof and get out, I mean, this is a big problem. You have big holdings. How are you going to get out in an illiquid market? Well, if you have the federal government and the states mandate long-term purchases, you have your exit, right?
Yeah, I mean, the idea of the Bitcoin strategic reserve is literally disgusting to me. Like, I don't have a stronger word that I can use for that. It makes me feel sick. Having been in Bitcoin for a long time, the idea that you're going to be using taxpayer funds from some guy in, some car mechanic in Iowa to buy your Bitcoin to make the price go up.
Let me describe how you're going to get the money, because you're not going to get it from taxes. Remember, taxes don't cover expenses. What you're going to do, and this brings us back to
Good
Tether.
point. Yeah.
Okay. This brings us back to Tether. What you're going to do is the New York Fed will say to Cantor Fitzgerald, who runs the back end for Tether, go sell, you're a primary dealer, go sell Treasury securities, which you're going to sell into a state pension fund or a corporate pension fund. So you're not going to take taxpayers' taxes. You're going to take their retirement savings and you're going to move it out of their pension funds. And you're going to move it into the Treasury, and then you're going to buy Bitcoin, right? In a way that's going to send the price to the moon. So literally, it's even more disgusting than you thought.
That is more disgusting. Yes, well done.
Right.
Well done.
Right. And I am sure, and I have lots more research to do, but I'm sure there is a definite connection to Tether. Because,
I wouldn't be surprised.
We are looking at a primary dealer operation with both Tether and now, do you know who the primary dealers are?
No.
Okay, there is a group of firms, it's 23 or 24 firms, basically anointed by the New York Fed. The New York Fed runs the Treasury bank accounts.
Oh, I thought you meant, do I know who they are specifically? Like,
okay.
Yeah, no.
But they are the people who make the primary market.
Right, they're the middlemen.
And make a big secondary. They're the middlemen on issuing U.S. Treasuries.
Right.
Okay. And so Cantor Fitzgerald, which is one of the primary dealers, they run the back office for Tether, basically. So they're supposedly taking the Tether proceeds and putting them into Treasury and using stablecoins to grow the market for Treasuries. Right. Okay.
I would love if there was really courageous, really hard-nosed journalists working on this, because I know that there is so much corruption here. It would blow people away, because when you've been around in the industry for a while, it's not the type of thing we're going to put in the book, but you've been around in the industry for a while and you follow the threads. At some point you go, ooh, that one's a little bit suspicious. Ooh, that one's a little bit suspicious. And a lot of these threads do point back to Tether. And I wouldn't be surprised. I can't predict the future, especially when you've got mass political corruption going on. It's hard to know, but I wouldn't be surprised if at some point we find an explosion, some sort of explosion, and we go, oh, somebody was lying and the promises don't hold up and the money that was supposed to be there is not there, and then we're in new territory. I
don't know if you just saw, Financial Times just did a big piece on Tether.
I didn't. No.
Oh, I'm going to find it and send it to you. So somebody at the Times is on to Tether. Whether it's good or bad, I don't know yet.
Okay, interesting.
So this is definitely on my list to spend more time. But here's what's interesting. We have one of the things that always struck me about Bitcoin was how many wonderful people committed to freedom were attracted into it. And one of the regrets I've always had is, I love the people, but I kept saying things that bothered them, because I kept saying, this is a pump and dump and, all the, anyway, but somehow I think with the integration of the securities markets with Bitcoin and crypto and this renewed interest, that somehow we can re-find each other, and the freedom fighters in the group can, whether you're from the securities world or the investment world or the venture world or the Bitcoin and crypto world, we can find each other, because that is the opportunity, to finally create a decentralized money that is out of control of, it's not just governments, it's the secret governance system.
Yes. And let me ask you, okay, realistically, you understand that, the power that the government has over the money supply is arguably the greatest power that it has. I mean, we are talking, how much power can one have in the world? Well, you might have the most power if you're in control of the US military, but you got to pay the US military somehow. So like money and banking is pretty much the center of the power network.
Right.
So
right.
do you think it would be realistic to imagine that the biggest financial powers in the world haven't tried to meddle with Bitcoin? Like, are they like, so they hear all the stories of what Bitcoin is, and it's a challenge to the biggest power centers in the world, and they're like, oh shucks, I guess we're just gonna have to be outcompeted now. Like, is that
so? My theory was, because I've seen this many times before, my theory was, whether the original design was put out by the powers that be, or somebody worked for them, or whether it was just hijacked by them, to a certain extent, to me, it doesn't matter. But to me, they're always trying to get the best and the brightest to prototype for them. And the reality is they can't pay, they can't hire. If you look at the best and the brightest in the Bitcoin world, most of them, they could never hire. The best and brightest wouldn't work for them, wouldn't help them, want nothing to do with them. So how do you get them prototyping your control grid for you and your digital currency for you? How do you trick them into doing that for you? And to me, the prototyping of Bitcoin was always the way you did it.
It's an interesting thought, and I think there's a lot of that might be true. And when you think about it as well, there's some deep irony here, because in my background and Roger's background is in the more extreme versions of libertarian. Like, we really are about individual freedom. And it's in this network of some hardcore libertarians that we got the version of Bitcoin now that everybody is talking about. I don't see evidence anywhere that this is a pro-freedom technology. And the spectrum of what this technology could be used for, it's not just it's harmless and it empowers people. It also goes in the negative direction. You called it a controlled network. I think that's a very fine term to use. That, okay, the flip side of Bitcoin is it's a public ledger, meaning all the transactions are tracked. And if the blockchain is very small, or the amount of total transactions is very small, it's fairly easy to do blockchain analysis. In fact, governments and police are doing blockchain analytics all the time to figure out, okay, who owns what, who's making this transaction, what's it for, and then all of the on-roads and off-roads into BTC, or I shouldn't say all of them, the vast majority of them are KYC exchanges that are complying with Know Your Customer laws. So they literally know, like, the individual identity of a bunch of people who are using the BTC blockchain, and so there's no privacy on it. It's sort of like a regulator's best case scenario. Right. So the spectrum is not like, oh, it's really good and it's harmless. It goes, no, there is a dystopian version of Bitcoin that we are almost already in right now. Right. So yeah, it might be that was always the intended design. You get the naive libertarian, idealistic types to build something for you. That might be part of the history.
Here's have you ever read The Master Switch by Tim Wu?
No.
Oh, I would recommend it to you. Tim Wu I think he teaches at Columbia, but he ran for lieutenant governor about 4 or 5 years ago in New York. But the book is called The Master Switch: The Rise and Fall of Information Empires. And what he describes, he goes back 150 years, literally to the telegraph. And he describes how there is a pattern where a new information technology comes out and entrepreneurs are so excited about it. It blossoms. They try lots of stuff. It's really wonderful. It's going to help decentralize and make people free. And then suddenly, wham, it's centralized. and then it, then it happens again, and then wham. And each time the central control builds through these different phases. And my theory is part of what we're talking about here is the most recent version of that.
It sounds spot on. Yeah.
Right.
Are you still convinced?
I think it's gotten partially unlocked with the Bitcoin ETF, but then there, probably the part where I'm less convinced of is this question of the sort of ideological founding vision of Bitcoin or these cryptocurrencies as sort of a cypherpunk, crypto-anarchist, libertarian, anti-centralized government thing. This is always the line.
Isn't that what got you interested in the first place?
That's what I thought was terrific about it. And then the question is, does it really work that way, or has that thread somehow gotten lost? And so when people in the FBI tell me that they'd much rather have criminals use Bitcoin than $100 bills, it suggests that maybe it's not quite working the way it was supposed to.
Have you sold any of your Bitcoin?
I still hold some. There are all these ways I didn't buy as much as I should have, and I'm not sure it's going to go up that dramatically from here.
From here?
Yeah, I think we got the ETF edition, and I don't know who else buys it quickly from here.
Some interesting investment advice. That actually surprised me because I don't think I've heard you. I thought you were still all in.
I still have a small position. It probably still can go up some, but it's going to be a volatile, bumpy ride. And I had a dual reason. One was this sort of ideological, decentralized future of computing world that I really do believe in, really believe would be better. And it seemed like the perfect vehicle for that for such a long time. And I am just much less convinced of that. And so
interesting.
So maybe Larry Fink with the BlackRock ETF surrendered to the forces, the anti-ESG forces, or maybe it's more like Bitcoin's been co-opted by them, and I worry it was more the latter.
So, okay, I want to just say a few things about Bitcoin Cash, because there was a fork, that was 2017, and Bitcoin Cash left to try and recapture the original vision.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about Bitcoin Cash and how it's doing.
Sure. So for people who don't know how things can fork, what does it mean for a Bitcoin to fork? So the software, because cryptocurrency software, generally speaking, is open source, that means you can change the code, run a new code that's very similar to the original code, and then kind of create your own network that is maybe 99% like the old network, but it's got some critical different design. And so you sort of make a branching coin or a branching project. And in 2017, the most important fork in Bitcoin's history happened, which is the Bitcoin Cash fork. So the preceding years, there were several attempts to fork away from the Bitcoin core developers. It had become clear that they weren't going to scale the way Satoshi intended, that they wielded the veto, and the industry tried to get around them on multiple occasions. That's part of the what we talk about in Hijacking Bitcoin. But it all kind of came to a head in 2017, where the group of people who said, look, we're going to stick with Satoshi's original vision. We're still interested in digital cash. They forked off and made a new chain called Bitcoin Cash. And the idea was that we're going to, build out the original design as much as we can. And then, if there are new technological inventions, there have been a few since the fork, we're going to try to add them and try to make a coin that's as pro-freedom as possible, that is supposed to be peer-to-peer cash for people. And ironically, something that still blows my mind in 2024 is there aren't too many projects still in crypto that I've seen that are genuinely trying to be peer-to-peer cash. Somehow, the use case of peer-to-peer cash in Bitcoin is not, people aren't trying to reach it. That is a whole thing that the cryptocurrency industry was founded on, there's like a handful of projects that are really trying to do this. Anyway, Bitcoin Cash is one of them. And it's one that has some historical significance. So when Satoshi Nakamoto left the project, he gave the essentially the keys to Bitcoin software to a man named Gavin Andresen. A lot of good things to say about Gavin. A couple of critical things to say about Gavin, but Gavin said in his words that Bitcoin Cash was the continuation of the project that he got involved with in Bitcoin, like in 2011 or 2010, even whenever Gavin Andresen got involved. So it's kind of the spiritual successor to Bitcoin that has the same transaction history up until 2017 when it forked away. Now, I don't want to sit here and do the thing that crypto commentators do, which is pitch specific coins. Okay, I've seen, like, Roger and I both are multi-coiners. Like, if it's not going to be Bitcoin Cash, that's fine. If there's some other project, that's fine. That makes the world a freer place. That if people are using, yeah, go ahead.
You want to see people have a free distributed payment system.
I want competing money. That's really what I want.
Right. You want out of control money is what I would say.
Yes. We want out of control money that comes from the marketplace. That's kind of the ideal. And if that is...
And I would say you also want real price discovery.
Yes. So that we should probably talk about the price a little bit, because when somebody asks, how's Bitcoin Cash doing? It depends on what you're looking at. So right now, for example, I think the price of what Bitcoin Cash is like $600. So compared to BTC's 100,000, if you want to look at, if your metric is price, then it's doing a lot worse than BTC Bitcoin.
Right. But one is a payment system. The other... So do you know the old Wall Street joke about trading sardines?
No.
Really?
Never heard.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to teach you something, and this goes back generations. But you learn this in your first year on Wall Street, okay?
Okay.
So a group of traders in London and New York are trading this shipment of sardines. And they run the price up, they run the price down. It's a pump and dump scheme.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, one young guy in New York decides he's going to take delivery of one of the shipments, and he does, and he opens it up, and the sardines are bad.
Yeah.
And he calls the guy in London, and he says, wait a minute, I just opened up that shipment. The sardines are bad. And the London trader gets really angry, and he said, Jesus, he said, those are trading sardines. Those are not eating sardines.
Right. Exactly.
Okay, so if you look at what is driving the price up of Bitcoin, it has to do with trading sardines.
Right.
And the reality is, you can make money in speculative markets.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. But ultimately, that has nothing to do with anything in the real world. And it depends on a fantastically inflationary monetary policy by the central banks.
Yes. So I like to say that, well, in fact, let me quote one of my friends. We were talking about Bitcoin Cash, and he said, look, bear markets are for building. He said, the price has not appreciated, a tiny fraction of whatever BTC is. But in that time frame, there is a dedicated group of people who are really trying to build the foundation such that if the information quality changes in the cryptocurrency markets, we'll be ready to handle the masses if they want to show up. So for example, there's a lot of people trying to build on Ethereum, and Ethereum has this, very deep scaling problems. And they have essentially made on Bitcoin Cash what was always an inherent possibility in Bitcoin's original design, that you can do a lot of smart contracting with Bitcoin Cash. So for people that don't know, the founder of Ethereum, Vitalik Buterin, was trying to use the original Bitcoin to do smart contracts, because that's actually latent in Bitcoin's design, is smart contracting.
Right.
And he saw what was happening in Bitcoin, realized that the core developers were not going to be friendly to this use case of Bitcoin, because the core developers decided we have our own vision and we're going to try to implement it. And so when he created Ethereum, that was because he didn't want to build what he was trying to build on Bitcoin. But that possibility has always been there. So on Bitcoin Cash now, they have smart contracting features and the scalability of the original Bitcoin. So, and has much better scaling properties than Ethereum. So that's something that would be very, very exciting that you have to build out in preparation of the masses coming. Also, though, there's an obvious relationship between prices and information. This is one of these critical principles of economics. People like to say in Bitcoin, the market has spoken, the market has spoken. Okay, that's not how markets work. Markets don't speak that way. Markets are a reflection of information. They're a way to distribute information throughout an economy. And I have overwhelming evidence from 99% of the conversations I have had with everybody in Bitcoin for like the last decade, the information quality in Bitcoin and cryptocurrency generally is extraordinarily low. It is extraordinarily low.
You're being way too nice.
I don't even have words for it.
I'm with you. It's dreadful. It's unbelievable. It's shocking.
It is genuinely shocking. So,
right.
So given the fact that there's this relationship between price and information quality, I don't know what the future looks like in terms of price, but at some point, you would imagine the information quality is going to adjust, and we would also expect prices to adjust. Let me give you just a short story here. So I originally wrote this little book called What's the Big Deal About Bitcoin in 2014. And I distinctly remember the conversations I was having at that time with people who were very confused about Bitcoin. I was talking about Bitcoin publicly, and I would have messages from people who would say, hey, Steve, can you tell me about this, tell me about that. And I thought, okay, I'm going to write a little introductory book. Okay. And people were deeply confused in 2014 about Bitcoin. They are more confused in 2024.
Yes.
That's hard to imagine.
But here's the thing.
Yes.
If I can mandate long-term government buying programs, I can run the price of Bitcoin to $50 million. I mean, it's unbelievable what I can, not 50 million, but I can run it up to $1 million, no problem.
Right. I think
no problem.
I think that's fair. So I will say, not just with Bitcoin Cash, there's a lot of interesting things about Bitcoin Cash. It still has, so it has optional privacy. There's this feature called Cash Fusion, where they're trying to build more privacy into Bitcoin Cash transactions, because there is a potential problem that if you have a public ledger and all the transactions are recorded, could that decrease your freedom? Is that if you're using this network that's public in that way, does that make the world a freer or a less free place? And so there's interesting privacy technology on Bitcoin Cash. It's not baked in, the privacy is not baked into the coin at the protocol level. And there are 2 other projects that I know of, I'm sure there are more out there, which are trying to bake privacy into the cryptocurrency project at the base level and trying at least to be used like cash. One of them is Monero, you might have heard of. It's kind of an old privacy coin. The other
and
is
our subscribers, Monero is the most popular.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
So you guys will know all about that then. And the other is a young one called Xano, and they're using the same fundamental privacy technology as Monero, but they're trying to make it, I think, a little bit more scalable. And their big thing is having tokens that are like layer 1 tokens that have the same level of privacy.
Right, but here's what needs to happen.
Yeah.
So one of the many things I like about hijacking Bitcoin is how you understand and describe the governance issues, and how whatever we do, we have to get the governance issues right.
Yeah.
And I think a conversation needs to happen about the governance issues on all of these different systems, because no financial product or financial system or payment system, they can all be hijacked without good governance and without proper transparency.
Completely
and without
agree.
proper information. And it's like we have to grow up and learn how to understand that and create that. And it's not just governance of I'm reading a book, I don't know if you've read Underground Empire yet, which is about the hardware systems and how the hardware systems are used to control.
Oh, interesting.
Very, very interesting, written by 2 academics and who know a lot about the hardware systems. And so we have to deal with the governance of everything from the hardware up to the software, and I think that's a conversation that hasn't happened yet.
I think that is of paramount importance. And I think you said we need to grow up. That is exactly what we need to do. People need to shake off their naive understanding of what cryptocurrency is, what Bitcoin is. And I speak for myself here too, because I was definitely more naive about the governance problems in Bitcoin. I bring up those other two privacy projects to actually, it's a very relevant point here, because what we have seen, here's an interesting proxy. Monero, which your readers are familiar with, is banned from a bunch of exchanges. So it's very hard. Yeah, oh yes, especially US exchanges. All over the world, they have banned Monero. It's not universal, but it's very commonly, it's probably one of the most commonly, if not the most commonly banned coin. Now, why is that the case? It might be because it works. So it might be that we have a proxy here, which is to say the projects perhaps that will empower people financially at a very deep level, we might run into, more straightforward problems, which is that they get banned, or that they're going, if they were to have more success, maybe their development will be infiltrated as well. So I think this is why the multi-coin approach is kind of the most mature one, where we say, look, this is a project we can be excited about. This is a project maybe we can use in commerce, and maybe if there are financial problems, widespread financial problems, this could be an alternative currency. But you're not going to stake your hopes and dreams on one coin or one project. And even if it's great right now, as we saw with Bitcoin, because Bitcoin was great in 2013, that doesn't mean it will be great in 5 years from now. So I do want to say one positive thing, though, that as jaded and pessimistic as I've become about Bitcoin, something wonderful has been accomplished that I don't think will go away, which is that it has onboarded a ton of people to cryptocurrency generally. And once you're in crypto, it's much easier to exchange between other cryptos. So if there's a big if you've got a bunch of Bitcoin and you're scared about what to do with it, maybe it's a bad idea, but you don't want to go back into fiat, it's going to be easier for you to exchange that one coin for a different coin. And going into the future, if we see promising projects that are also hijacked and derailed, it's going to be, I think I can envision a future in which you have to stay flexible on which alternative currency that you're using. And that I think that hurdle is largely overcome, where people are sort of familiar with the concept of cryptocurrencies, and we don't have to keep making the most very basic arguments about, like, there's this coin that you can use and you can download a wallet on your phone. I feel like there's a bit of that onboarding process that that Bitcoin has helped solve, which is nice to see.
So here's where I want to go next, because your book was published in the first quarter of 2024. So it came out in March.
It was that was the pre-sale. It came the actual sale date, I think, was April 5th, if I recall.
Okay.
Yeah.
One thing you might or might not know about me is I spent 11 years litigating with the Department of Justice. I have a PhD in litigating with the Department of Justice on financial issues. And it was it's one of those wild, shaggy dog stories, but we caught them falsifying evidence. I mean, I can't tell you how much I know about deep state tactics and dirty tricks and how you control financial markets by controlling the humans.
Right.
Anyway, but when I tell you Hijacking Bitcoin is a book, if you could get enough financial professionals reading it, would have a revolutionary impact on that pricing function and understanding about Bitcoin. And I find it very remarkable that literally right after the book is published, the Department of Justice just decides to go after Roger for something that happened many, 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 many years before.
Right.
Now, I'm assuming that is proof positive the book is as good as I think it is.
I don't think it's a coincidence. So it was less than a month after the book is made available. So it's literally in April 5th, I think the book is available for the sale. And it was like 3 weeks later or something, Roger's sitting in a jail cell in Spain.
Right. And if you look at how long it takes to cook up that case, 3 weeks is about as fast as you could do it.
I think they were planning something before that. I think there's a longer standing problem that he has had with the U.S. authorities. But the fact that this was, so if people haven't heard, Roger is being persecuted from the U.S. government for they're claiming that he didn't pay his taxes correctly on his exit tax. And the exit tax is when he renounced his U.S. citizenship in 2014. This was 10 years ago. They are claiming that he didn't account for his Bitcoin the right way.
Right. But here's, in my experience, when the tax authorities have a problem with you,
yeah,
and they realize that you have paid X and they think you owe 2X, they simply call up your lawyer or your CPA and say, we think you owe 2X. We want to come negotiate. And you go and negotiate and fight or whatever. Right. And if you disagree, you go to civil trial.
Right.
What you don't do is you don't skip over the ask, you don't skip over the negotiation, and you don't skip over the civil trial to a criminal trial right out of the blue and an extradition. Right. That's unheard of. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
It is ridiculous and disturbing, and I think it's scandalous. I wouldn't be. There was an interview that Tom Woods, myself, and the lawyer Robert Barnes gave, where we were talking about Roger's case.
I watched some of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Robert was saying that he was essentially saying, look, this has all the signs of it being a hit job. Like, there's going to be a scratch under the surface here, and they're trying to score a big win. Roger's effectively already on a list for being an enemy of the state, renouncing his citizenship, and they came after him. I think 10 years prior, they put him in jail for selling fireworks without a license. And so it's a deep, long, scandalous history. But Roger's on the naughty list for sure. And I agree with you. I don't think it's a coincidence that this was a charge from 10 years ago in 2014, and literally less than a month after this book is made public, now they decide it's time to arrest him.
Let me tell you why this book is such a problem. If I'm right about what they're trying to do with the Bitcoin reserve, and here's what you need to understand. The Bitcoin reserve is not about the Bitcoin reserve. The Bitcoin reserve is about a land grab. So if you watch, if you read our editorial sort of on the Bitcoin reserve, one of the things I do is I put a little clip of Howard Lutnick who runs Cantor Fitzgerald in the back office of Tether, talking about the fact that the U.S. balance sheet has $500 trillion of land and mineral resources on it. Okay. And how we monetize that or privatize that. There's a lot of schemes rolling around about monetizing and doing things without that land and those mineral resources.
I flew down to Brownsville, Texas, right? And I met with Elon, and we spent 2 hours together. And I told him we were going to create the department Doge, right? And he did exactly that. He started laughing and he was happy. He goes, no, seriously. And I said, no, it's going to be called Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency, but we're definitely calling it Doge for you. And he was just so lit, happy. Like, he just thought it was funny. And that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
If you have the greatest capitalist in America and you can make him happy, that's pretty good. What is the balance sheet of the United States of America? What's everything we own and everything we have? I think it's worth $500 trillion. So then you say, okay, Howard, can you make 0.25% on it? Right now, if all of your assets are a giant mountain of, palladium and gold, and you can't move it and you have to just look at it and go, oh, that's so pretty. That's not going to help us. But we have land and we have minerals. So if we have 500 trillion and we can make 0.25%, if you give us a $500 trillion asset, can you make $1 trillion off of it? All right.
Hopefully.
I'm going to rename that famous department we just called it. We called it the Department of the Interior. Let's give it the real name. The Department of all the land and mineral rights of the United States of America. But the asset value of the United States of America, $500 trillion, the addressable market. Mm-hmm. Can Elon Musk and I come up with 0.25%, $1.25 trillion of revenues? And the answer is.
Now, why is this important? if you put aside Bitcoin, put aside crypto, we're coming into an end game worldwide where the collateral fraud is pinching. And if you're going to reset the financial system and economy, the big issue here is how are you going to grab the real assets? You know, the game of musical chairs is open. Who owns the real assets, right? And so that land and resources is very, very wealthy. If you look at the trial balloons on Bitcoin, all the trial balloons are, we sell our Bitcoin into the reserve, and if we reinvest in real estate, it's tax-free. So it's a tax-free swap. You know, Kennedy floated, I think, a 1031 exchange into real estate. And so this is how you pick up the real estate, and you do it by swapping you run your Bitcoin up and you swap it in, and then you swap it into the land. And it's a, you know, this is making fortunes that last generations. This is an incredible, you know, and I could give you the whole history of financial fraud in the federal balance sheet. And this simply is, you've plundered everything you can take out with securities and cash. Now you're going to plunder the real assets. But where are you going to get the capital to do that? Here it is.
It's funny you say that, because in what was the last run? I think it was 2021. It was just after, you know, the government gave checks, COVID stimulus checks, and the price of Bitcoin went up. And that's when, I think if I'm getting the dates correct, there was like advertisements on TV for crypto. Tom Brady was involved, and like it hit the consumer market really hard. And the price went up to like $67,000 or something. I remember thinking to myself, what is a bigger pool that can be drawn from now? Now I've seen, I was tracking Bitcoin and aware of it when it was $1. I didn't have enough wisdom to invest when it was $1, but I was aware of it. So I had seen the thing appreciate 67,000-fold. And I'm thinking, okay, how does this grow? And I concluded, I don't actually think it can. I think Tom Brady ads on TV is kind of the biggest. You got the pool. I wasn't creative enough to think
mandated government purchases will do it, particularly
ding, ding, ding.
federal and state. But here's the thing. Here's the thing, and here's the problem with your book, or the wonderful thing, the divine intervention with your book. It will only work if you can create fiat Bitcoin and sell it into the government. If you're limited to 21 million, it's not big enough. And I think the problem with hijacking Bitcoin is you blow completely the lid. You know, this makes the fraud much harder to pull off.
I hope that is the case. and I hope that it is, at the very least, regular people will understand a little bit more deeply what's been going on in Bitcoin. And they're going to be, you know, I hate the idea that we're going into this world where people like Roger, who's devoted an incredible amount of his time and resources and life to trying to build up Bitcoin for years. I mean, he got the name Bitcoin Jesus because that was his thing. He was Mr. Bitcoin. And as a libertarian, he's trying to make people freer. He's trying to make the world a better place. And then I, to a much less extent than Roger, was also trying to do this. My family was involved in crypto. And it makes me sick to think that that thing we were trying to build could be pushing people. People get excited about the narrative, and then it gets hijacked, and now it's going to be pushing people into the opposite of that system.
Well, but here's the thing. This is like an infection that has to rise to the surface.
Yeah.
And the other thing, the thing I most appreciate about the book is that while you're facing the incredible fraud that's going on, you're also being reminded of the incredible possibilities of what can be done if we can finally free ourselves from a secret governance system that uses stuff like this for manipulation.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the divine is there and the demonic is there, and it's, you know, it's like two arcs. It's just rising to the surface, and we you know, it is a financial Armageddon. We have to have this battle.
Yeah, that's an interesting
Yeah.
way of putting it.
So-
And there is almost a funny plot line here, which is, there are people like Michael Saylor who are just peak establishmentarians talking about how Bitcoin is not going to compete with the US dollar, and the whole point is just to buy it and sit on it. And there is a possible timeline here in which people wake up fast enough and you get the sailors of the world holding the bag for old Bitcoin that doesn't actually have its fundamental utility anymore. There is some possibility here, which I don't know if this is probably not going to happen, but it would be funny to think that, the punchline is the regular person is saved from the financial Armageddon, and maybe the people that take the blow on the head are the establishment themselves. That would be amazing if we end up in that timeline.
So here's the thing. It depends on whether you can continue to drain U.S. and global retirement savings to fund the game. Can we put U.S. retirement savings into things that bring fundamental utility into the world, or are they there to finance plunder?
Yeah.
So it's real capitalism versus plunder capitalism. That's another way to think of it. Okay, so I want to just turn now and mention you have a Substack, you have a website, and you have a Substack. You have a podcast that you can access through your Substack called Patterson in Pursuit.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, it's very good.
Well, thank you.
I've really enjoyed. I was plowing through it today, and you have one that I'm going to post, and I like in particular. It's called Our Present Dark Age. And what you do is you describe the fact that so much of what we're dealing with in this world is false.
Yeah.
And we are living in a dark age. I believe we're living in a dark age. I mean, I remember as a young person, I grew up in a poor neighborhood and I dealt with a lot of violence. And I remember when I was 16, sitting down and thinking for a week, somehow I got put on this unbelievably primitive planet. Do I really want to live here? It's so primitive. And I'd rather say, rather than say primitive planet, I'd rather say we're in a dark age.
Mm.
But you have a way of, rising above all these different, in the different industries or different knowledge areas, how much misinformation there is, how much fakery there is, and looking at it at the highest level and saying, wait a minute, the whole framework is basically,
yeah.
And I've ordered your book, Square One, so, because I want to, I love looking at it from that standpoint. And I wanted to ask you, have you read Bruce Charlton's book about the corruption of science?
No, but it sounds familiar.
He's talking about the same thing you are, and he describes how massive amounts of money are thrown at scientists to get them to do research into things that are irrelevant, wrong, or Anyway, but he doesn't manage to get to as high a level as you do. So
well, thank you.
And I think what we're talking about with financial matters and money systems is simply a portion of that bigger problem, which is why I always go back to the governance system.
Yeah, I have been researching a lot of different domains for many, many years. And it actually started in economics, where I realized the mainstream economic theories, Keynesian economics, there's big problems in Keynesian economics. And I was surprised at how big the problems were. I thought, this is a scandal. And then I kind of went down a different rabbit hole of trying to learn about health. And you learn about, for example, the food pyramid. And you go, how could it be that the food pyramid is like the opposite of the truth? They got everything wrong, exactly wrong. And then it would be, I learned a little bit about statins, for example. You go down the statin rabbit hole and you go, but the fundamental research here was wrong and corrupt. The fundamental causal theory about what statins are supposed to do is wrong. And then, anyway, I go domain after domain and I go, oh, there are really big problems everywhere. And maybe this is a symptom of something bigger. And so I've tracked, let's say, a bunch of abstract kind of theoretical philosophical ideas in different domains down to the fundamentals. And it appears to me that our sort of philosophical paradigm is really bad and was established around the time period of like 1880 to 1950, in pretty much every domain of thought, you had some revolution. You had general relativity in quantum mechanics, in physics. You had Cantor's set theory in mathematics. You had electrification in the world generally. You had the development of Keynesian economics. You had the modern synthesis in biology. So in domain after domain, the 70-year time period was a revolution. And
so you had the hijacking of everything.
Yeah, it's something like that. And hijacking is not the worst. It's not the worst word to use, especially after World War II. You had an unbelievable amount of state money that was put into academic and scientific research that just took those paradigms and made them the final say on everything. And suddenly those paradigms are incredibly hard to get out of.
So this is why the money issue is at the center of this, because what you see again and again in all these different areas is using government or state money. So central banking or government money or the combination thereof to basically send things in a particular direction.
100%.
Right.
Yes. And you mentioned before the quality of information in crypto and Bitcoin is atrocious, and it is. But it's that level, that information quality level is not unique to cryptocurrency.
Absolutely.
So if that's true, if that's actually the case, and in a bunch of different domains we have atrocious information quality levels, then I make the claim that we're in fact in a dark age, or we have been in a dark age for like at least a century. But I'm incredibly optimistic. I see lots of signs that suggest we're getting out of it. I think the internet's a big part of that. Alternative information channels that can't be shut down is a big part of it.
The first step is to realize you are in one.
100%.
That's when you say, okay, I'm getting out. Okay, so
yes, yeah.
Here's the thing, Steve. I could talk to you forever, but what I want to do is we need to close. We need to close, and we need to talk about how we promote this book. I think this is unbelievably important to get this everywhere. And I recommend to everybody listening, buy it and give it away for Christmas. So particularly if you have financial professionals in your life, they are going to, I can't tell you how many financial planners, investment, equity traders will finally say, finally I understand Bitcoin. So get this book in everybody's hands. How do we help Roger? Can we sign the petition? What do we do?
Yes. So Roger's case really is its own scandal. And, I recommend if people, this man is kind of a hero in libertarian circles or in pro-freedom circles. He's funded a bunch of very important projects, whether people know it or not. And he is being persecuted right now. He's essentially a political prisoner in Spain. And so there's a growing movement of us who are trying to call for a presidential pardon of Roger. At the very least, the case against him needs to be dropped. We're pushing for a presidential pardon. And if people want to learn more about that or just try to support him, go to freerogernow.org. And you can sign a petition that's up there. It takes 30 seconds of your time. And the more people that sign it, the bigger prominence he gains.
Right.
And hopefully we're going to get a pardon for him.
One of the things I want to mention is when I got to know Lynn Albrecht, Ross's mother.
Yeah.
The reason we had been able to win our litigation, it took 11 years, but the reason we were able to win is because we used disclosure in very powerful ways. And I was able to spend a lot of time with Lynn briefing her on what we did and how we did. And she has done a magnificent job of
She's a hero.
Getting that whole case online and using disclosure to tell that story. If I can help you or Roger or anybody do the same, if anything we learned about how to deal with these situations, I'm happy to help if in any way that I can.
Well, that's very kind of you. Yes, I'll connect you to his team, and we can use all the help.
Okay.
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's how. Now tell us again the name of your Substack, the name of your website, how we connect up with you and access your material.
So my work's at steve-patterson.com. I also have a Substack that it mirrors a lot of the same content that's on my personal website, and that's stevepatterson.substack.com. You can find my YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/Steve Patterson. It's got the podcast, as you were mentioning. It's called Patterson in Pursuit. And I haven't done that full time.
I'm a subscriber. I'm a subscriber, and I recommend it.
Excellent. I was able to travel around the world talking with mainly academics about a bunch of different subjects. So people might be interested. It's kind of I guess before coming to the Dark Age conclusion, you can kind of see the lead up and build up in these conversations I was having. But yeah, that's where you can find me.
Well, I've ordered your book, and I couldn't get it in the Netherlands, so it's coming into the United States. It'll take me a while to get it, but I've ordered your book, and after I finish it, I would love to have you come back on to talk a little bit more about how we move out of the Dark Ages.
Yeah, well, I would love to. Yes, that would be a blast. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate your time.
Well, Steve Patterson, you and Roger did an incredible job on this book, and it's a real... I know how hard it is to make something this passionate and important, this sort of calm, clear, and coherent. I don't know how you did it, but you did a great job, and a tip of hat to you, and thank you for joining us on the Solari Report.
Thank you.